Joining me is Dr. John Cornish. Dr. Cornish is the co-founder of the Recovering Grace website, which played a massive part in exposing Bill Gothard, IBLP, and the years of abuse that had gone on within the Shiny Happy People cult. Dr. Cornish, thank you so much for joining me to talk about your experience in the Shiny Happy People cult. Before we get started, though, Dr. Cornish, I wanted to thank you for helping create a platform that brought victims of this cult together and gave them a voice. I've heard, I'm already getting emotional. I've heard so many stories from former cult members of how isolated and alone they felt, and never imagined that there was this group of people, a community that experienced the same trauma, the same nightmare, and felt the same way. And Recovering Grace has really given these people a way to support one another and start the healing process. And so I just want you to know how grateful I am. And I know I speak for a lot of people on that. So thank you. So let's get right into it before I cry like a baby. What gave you the idea originally to start this Recovering Grace website?
Yeah, that's a long story. So I was one of those that I grew up in ATI, and then I made the world's worst decision and went to college. I broke the rules and headed that way and studied music. That's kind of my passion is in the real world is music. And kind of just left the Gothardism stuff behind, and the whole time kind of pursuing my own personal recovery and disentanglement. And I went on to seminary, did a master's and my doctorate, which is in church music, and just kind of left it all behind. But it was 2011, and what kind of triggered it for me was ABC, I think it was 2020. They did a segment on abuse in the Independent Fundamental Baptist Church, which, as you know, and probably many of your listeners know, it's just a stone's throw away from Gothardism. A lot of overlap between Gothardism and fundamental Baptist world. But it just kind of hit me in a place where I'm like, that reminds me about what I experienced, the purity culture and the abuse and the cover-ups. So I think it was a day or two after that, I wrote a blog post. I had started a personal blog a few months before, kind of New Year's resolution thing. Wrote a blog post called My Life in IF. I called it IFB/ATI because I'm like, IFB is what people are learning about. And I just wrote my story. Like, I wrote about what I grew up in, the world's, my experiences, part of my disentangling journey in there. And I just published it. I thought, maybe 5 people would read it. And within weeks, within days, my inbox was full. And I was getting, my little WordPress blog counter was showing all these thousands of hits and shares. And I was seeing it on social media, and I was like, boy, this thing is crazy. I hit a nerve or something. And one of those emails was an invite from someone inviting me to a Facebook group called ATI Student Survivors. It actually still exists now, 12 years later. And it was in that Facebook group that I found what you talked about a minute ago, realizing that there are other people out there who are raised in this. And I'm not just the only one who walked away going, this is crazy. And this is not God. And this is not the Bible. And this is not grace.
Right.
So it was that journey of discovering others who are like-minded, and then realizing, wait a second, Bill Gothard is still alive. He's still doing this. He's still teaching this. He's still popular in these circles. And there was just a real synergy in that group of what can we do to speak the truth, to speak the shared experiences in a public way. So it was just one afternoon. We were just kind of chatting in this group, and I'm like, well, what if we did a website? And that was essentially the germ of the idea that became Recovering Grace. And from there was a kind of a organic team of people that came together that had different skills and writers, and we developed little teams and launched this thing about 2 months after that. And that's how we got going.
So you started the website in 2011.
Mhm.
Did you anticipate how powerful this would become? I mean, and when I say powerful, I mean as a force for good within this, ex-cult member community, but also powerful in the sense that ultimately it took down this massive organization.
Yeah, I think we hoped it might make a difference and it might help other people who are either questioning or have left and are looking for hope. I think we had hopes that it would do that. It would help those people. I don't think we ever dreamed it was possible that we would lead to something, to uncovering some of the things that we uncovered and were able to make public that ultimately brought some justice to the situation. So I think we hoped to help people, but I don't think we ever had. I don't think we were arrogant enough to think that we could bring Gothard down, if you want to put it that way.
Right. Right. I really do feel it, and they talked about it in the Shiny Happy People documentary, right? Where
Yeah.
some of these victims that were featured in the documentary, their first inkling that other people had experienced what they were experiencing was on the Recovering Grace website.
Right.
Which is just crazy.
Yeah. And even when we were first publishing some of those stories, that we were doing it was a sexual abuse awareness month,
Hmm.
not just on our website, but it was a public month. And so we'd had some stories submitted, some personal stories of people who'd experienced abuse from parents or in the church or siblings or whatever. But then we kind of had our first submission of Bill
Mm.
and what he was doing. And I think all of us on the Recovering Grace team, some had worked at headquarters, some worked at other training centers. All of us had heard the kind of the rumors that,
Right.
or just kind of the gossip that Bill had his favorites. I remember hearing that in my hometown when I was like 13 or 14 years old from someone who worked at headquarters, saying, "Oh yeah, this is kind of one of his quirks, is that he likes pretty blonde girls."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was almost kind of like, that's just how Uncle Bill is. He just so all of us had heard that, but it was like in that moment we went, wait, what have we, what has the world been dismissing for
Yes.
50 years?
Mm-hmm.
So we published that first story under the name, the pseudonym was Lizzie. That's the
Mm-hmm.
first one. If you go to the website, and from there it was an avalanche. I mean, it was they started coming in. There was comments on that story.
Mm-hmm.
Me too, me too, me too. We took among the team that it was Me Too 6 years before Me Too.
Right. Yeah.
And then we were like, wow, we didn't know what was going on. And from there, it was just a matter of how do we release this information? How do we give victims who are willing to share a platform
Mm-hmm.
that's not exploitative, um, but also exposes that there's a man doing some very wicked things in a very
Mm-hmm.
powerful position who still has access to lots of young girls.
Well, and then it was just really a couple years after that that he was ultimately removed from his position as the leader of IBLP. And I really think that this, Recovering Grace, the stories that people were sharing,
Mhm.
it really was the catalyst for that.
Right.
I don't
Well,
think you could have seen it happen otherwise.
yeah. Well, and when those first stories came in 2012, we had hoped that there would be some sort of repentance or some kind of acknowledgement from IBLP board.
Yeah.
I mean, it seems far-fetched now to think that, but I think maybe our naivety at the moment, we thought, maybe this can be dealt with. But the stories kept coming.
Mm-hmm.
Bill reached out to us and to me multiple times, and it was always just, how do we make this go away? How do we get you
Right.
guys to shut up, basically?
Right. Right.
Um,
And I think that's an interesting aspect of this, is that Bill Gothard reached out to you directly.
mhm.
You've had conversations with this guy, and like you said, it wasn't repentance, as
No.
he would put it, right? It
No.
was justification and cover up,
Yeah. His
right?
questions are always about, what are their real names? How do I get in touch
Hmm.
with them? Can you help me meet with them? Um, I would ask him point blank, why did you do these things? I would ask about specific instances, specific behaviors he had done. And there was always some, well, he never would just acknowledge it. He would deflect.
Mhm.
And I always tell people that when you're talking to Bill, when he's done, he hangs up. And that's what would happen. If he would
Really?
push, 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 and then you don't give him anything, he's like, all right, we'll talk to you later, and hang up on you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
It's just unbelievable to me. What was your, kind of reaction when you started seeing some of these horror stories? And I mean, not just about Gothard, but just about the culture of abuse that exists within. I don't want to say just within IBLP. It certainly
Right.
is within IBLP, but really, it's within this fundamental ideology, right?
Yeah,
What?
it was. Yeah, it definitely was. I mean, I've always believed that Gothard's teachings either had more influence on modern fundamentalism and evangelicalism than people like to admit.
Mhm.
But I think the reality is the reason Gothard was so popular in the 70s in evangelical circles is because his teachings weren't that far from what people believed about authority and
Right.
and purity and that type of thing.
Hmm.
Um, as far as my reaction, it was eye opening. Like,
Mm.
I know for me, growing up, I was never physically abused
Hmm.
in some of the ways that I've seen. I was never sexually abused, anything like that. I had it pretty good compared
Yeah.
to some of the stories that I've read. I've spent a lot of years disentangling belief systems and behaviors and psychological things that I can trace back to Bill Gothard. But when I saw the stories, the horrible stories of sexual abuse, of
Hmm.
physical abuse, psychological terror that people
Hmm.
were raised in, it was devastating in a way, and it was heavy. Like, I had no idea, even people that I knew, what they were growing up in,
Mm.
and what their experience of ATI was. Um, and it just reinforced to me that we've got to do something
Right.
to bring it to light.
Yep.
Um,
It gives you that motivation to keep going
yeah,
with this website, with the documentaries, with
right.
speaking out, right, and
Absolutely.
identifying the evil that exists within this organization.
Absolutely.
How do you respond to people that still defend Bill Gothard, IBLP? What's your reaction to that?
That's shifted over the last 12 years. When we first started, there were a ton of defenders out there
Mm.
on social media and in the real world. And 12 years later, there's not a lot of voices, especially publicly, that will
Hmm.
defend him. There are a lot more people who I think still embrace the belief system,
Right.
the seven basic principles, and they kind of try to thread this needle of, well, yeah, Bill really messed up, but his teachings were still biblical,
Right.
and before we hang on to that. So I guess when I interact with those folks, it kind of depends on where they're coming from.
Hmm.
At this point, if someone is still defending Bill, and there are people out there on social media who are still saying all these victims are liars,
Hmm.
and this is all made up, and this is just bitter, angry kids. They talk about us as if we're kids, and I'm like, no,
Right.
we're all adults, with some of us with grandkids, and
Uh-huh.
it's like we're not children anymore. We can think on our own, but that's not coming from a place of bitterness. But those people, there's just not a lot you can do. There's some that,
Right.
no matter what you say, they're gonna believe the best about Bill.
Right.
It's those who are struggling, who are on the fence, who are still holding on to those teachings. Those are the ones where just try to reach out with grace and say, hey, I was you once.
Hmm.
That's always been my approach from the day one. Is everything I write I'm writing as if I'm writing to myself 20 years ago.
Mm. I think
um,
that's a great approach too, because a lot of these people, they're still so in the dark.
yeah.
And even if they're not defending Gothard, if they're defending the ideology there,
Right.
what I've said repeatedly is it's that exact ideology that created this environment for
Right.
predatory behavior.
Right.
So you can't just blame it on Gothard. You also have to take a look at the
Right.
basic teachings, right? And
Right.
if there's still people involved in that, you're absolutely right. You have to approach them with love and with grace if you want to help save them.
Right. And I think the good thing is there's so much screwy within the system, and I don't think I don't think any of us, especially those of us that come out, made it through without asking questions
Mm,
about is this right? What's going on here? But at the time, in the late 90s, there wasn't any answers out there. There wasn't any place to go and find out, huh, okay, so other people think the same way, or this blog post explains why this teaching doesn't make sense with what I'm reading here in the Bible.
hmm
Um, and that's kind of where we try to fit in, is to
That,
kind of,
yeah, I mean, it's putting the information out there. It's
yeah,
generating the awareness, right? So that people at least have resources to go to when they
right,
start, like you said, when they start questioning, this doesn't seem right.
right,
This
right.
doesn't seem terribly biblical or Christian or, even reasonable, right? They've got a place to go. And Recovering Grace gives that to them. What have you had to deal with, threats or intimidation because of this website?
Not too much. I think that the strongest pushback that we have experienced as our team has come maybe not even so much from the institution of IBLP. Honestly, there hasn't been a lot of pushback from them, especially
Hmm.
once they kind of ousted Gothard, and they know the reality is they know.
Yeah.
Um, I think that the biggest challenge for some of our team members has come from families
Mm,
and close friends. They're going like, "Why are you doing this? Gothard was a good man." Or at this point, it's more about why do you keep attacking us? Because
mm,
a lot of parents take it personally that we're
yeah.
speaking out against the teachings as if we're blaming them. And the
Hmm.
reality is, most of us, we don't blame them. Yes, it ultimately was their decisions, their choices that took us down that road. But I think all of us can look at our parents and put ourselves in their shoes, especially now as we're all parents going, it's scary raising kids in 2023. And I wish there were 7 steps to how to do it right. Um, so I think a lot of the personal difficulties have come more from that.
Mm,
Yes, I mean, I'd be lying if I said we didn't ever have some trepidation about, well, what if this multi-million-dollar nonprofit decides that we're all worth taking to court?
right.
But I mean, there's umbrella policies. That's part of our
Right.
security there. But the reality is, we just never published anything that we didn't believe 100% was true.
Mm,
And ultimately, if we got taken to court, we could prove what we published, and that gave us a lot of safety and security there. And the reality is, for me, the first time I talked to Bill Gothard on the phone was terrifying. It's
yeah.
like, I was in my 30s and I'm talking to this man, and it was like talking to God,
Right.
because my childhood view of him was,
Yeah.
Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Bill Gothard.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um,
He's the one prophet, right?
yeah, yeah. But as you talk to him more, it's kind of like it's Wizard of Oz. The curtain is unveiled, and you realize he's just a feeble, powerless old man,
Hmm.
who's desperately trying to hold on to his fantasy place in the world. That
Yeah.
he's this major evangelical leader, and he's not anymore.
No, no. I mean, he's still, publishing books. He's still very active on social media, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
Well, his moderators are, at any rate,
yes,
still
his moderators.
denying any wrongdoing on Facebook specifically.
Yeah, well, he tries to thread the needle because he did release a public statement at the time saying that his actions of holding hands and touching hair and things were inappropriate.
Hmm.
But we all know that goes beyond inappropriate, as
Yes.
as did the IBLP board. So
Absolutely. Yeah. One of the things that kind of shocked me watching the Shiny Happy People documentary was that they had to physically remove him from the property. I did not know that. And it just shows how desperately he was trying to cling on to his organization.
yeah, well, and he's filed multiple lawsuits against the IBLP board trying to reclaim the institute. So
Has he really?
yes, he has. Yeah.
I
So
didn't know that either.
yeah,
Uh,
you can look it up.
how crazy, how crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What is your goal kind of moving forward for Recovering Grace, and how can people help with this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Those that have followed us closely over the last 12 years will know that in the last 5 to 6, 7 years, we haven't been super active. There's a number of reasons for that. Mostly we got burned out because we were publishing content like crazy, and then we just hit a point where we had several people take new jobs and start school and things, and it just kind of we weren't real sure about what was next. So we just kind of let it go to sleep. And in some ways, this documentary has kind of jolted us awake, going, wait, there's a whole new generation now of either former ATI students, people who were involved in IBLP, who now realize that they're not alone and they're looking for the same answers we were 12, 20, 30 years ago. Plus, there's a whole new interest from the outside of this cult and what it taught. So it's kind of brought our team back together with lots of conversations in recent weeks about what does Recovering Grace need to do going forward. How can we help? What's our niche in the world? So we're exploring that. Talking about things like maybe doing some podcasting and some continue writing and just kind of reaching out and being there and helping people more with the recovery journey. I think the exposing of the rot and the wickedness has been done, and Shiny People just kind of blew the lid off of that worldwide. It said, here's the story.
Yeah.
But trying to find some ways to be there for those who are recovering from spiritual abuse, not only from Gothard, but maybe even other cults and fundamentalist sources as well.
That's one of the most common pieces of feedback that I've gotten to the podcast series that we're doing is, I wasn't an IBLP, but so much of this sounds incredibly familiar. I went through the same things, experienced the same abuse. So yeah, I think, Recovering Grace is, obviously an incredible forum for ex-cult members, but also for people who have just experienced similar upbringings or, similar religious ideologies. So I think that, is there on the website, is there a way for people to donate if they want to try to help out that way?
Yes. So we do have a donate page on our website. It links to a PayPal address. People can pitch in. Obviously, we have ongoing costs with hosting and content production, and especially as we look at re-ramping up again, we're looking at some costs and some other things, some other ideas that I can't share yet. So definitely there's a place for that. And if PayPal's not someone's thing, they can also email us and say, hey, how else can I do that? We're also looking for volunteers who have skills, always looking for people who are good at, graphic design, web design, podcast skills, things like that. So, it never hurts to reach out to us and say, hey, I have these skills. How can I help? That's always a big help to us. That's how we got started, was people saying, I can do this. And we put it all together. So
it sounds to me like the message is kind of stay tuned, more to come. Right. So just keep an eye on the Recovering Grace website. Continue to support
Facebook
however you can. Facebook page. Okay.
Once we get some things going, we're gonna blast it out there. So
that's fantastic. I'm excited to see what happens. Dr. Cornish, thank you again so much. I know, like you mentioned, you're very humble. You've got a whole team that's helping out with this, but I know that you've been the driving force behind this website, and you've helped so many people. So we're just incredibly grateful for your service, and grateful to have you on this podcast. So thank you again.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.